Welcome to Syncreate, a show where we explore the intersections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. Our goal is to demystify the creative process and expand the boundaries of what it means to be creative. I'm Melinda Rothaus, and I help individuals and organizations bring their creative dreams and visions to life. So today on the show, we're doing something a little different. We're kind of doing a season 1 recap. We started the show in May, and it's now December. Yeah. And I have Mike Osborne with me today, who's been my audio producer throughout this journey, and quite a journey it's been. We featured you on the first episode of the show, so feels like we're kind of coming full circle here as we conclude the year, and just want to kind of look back on lessons learned, where we started, where we've come to, and I'm going to kind of let you take it from here and kind of turn the tables a little.
Awesome. I'm excited to do that.
Me too.
I have so many questions
boy.
for you. All right.
Okay, am I ready for this?
I think so. No, I actually think this will be fun. I mean, as you said, it's been a real journey. And I don't know, we both, I think, have learned a lot over the last several months about developing a show and thinking about audience, thinking about the experience, thinking about what we can do that's original and unique and cool and fun and all that. And it's meta that way. I mean, it's so like true to what Syncreate is all about.
Totally. So, what is our creative process?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping we can get into that a little bit.
Yes.
So here's where I thought we might start. You said a moment ago, as you say on every show, we explore the intersections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. We view creativity broadly, and one of our primary goals is to demystify the creative process while expanding the boundaries of what it means to be creative. There's a lot going on in those sentences, and I think I'd like to hear you elaborate on some of those ideas. And I think by asking that question, I'm hoping to try and get at, the why of the show a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, there's a lot packed in there. So talk to me about those sentences and talk to me a little bit about the why of the show.
Yeah. So when I first began to envision this show, it was during the pandemic when we were all sort of in quarantine and on Zoom. And I sort of had this initial spark of inspiration to really explore creativity and psychology and spirituality on a deeper level. But I really see that as kind of my happy triangle. Personally, the things that I'm most interested in and passionate about. Creativity is kind of my lifeblood. It's what I do personally and professionally. And it's a way that I've found to weave all the different strands of my life together.
Yeah.
And of course, I did my doctorate in psychology with a focus on creativity. And, I also am very much on a spiritual path myself, personally, around mindfulness, particularly. But, I have a background in religious studies. I've studied many of the world's religious traditions, and I have a deep respect for, questions of spirituality and how that informs people's lives.
Yeah.
So that's why those three things. And then, one of the things around creativity is that, to demystify and expand the boundaries, because I think there's this misconception that only certain people are creative.
Yeah.
That it's only artists or only, well-known people. And I'm a big believer in everyday creativity, which we talk about in creativity studies, which is, I personally believe we're all creative. We all have that innate capacity as human beings. We are problem solvers. We're constantly coming up with new ways of doing things and solving everyday problems in the context of our lives. We just talked about that in the episode that came out today with Robert Cleve. It's like, when we were in quarantine, how we were figuring out how to just navigate our lives in that new context. That's creative.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I think what I hear in that answer is that actually these two sentences are linked. Like they should be back to back, right? That psychology is the study of the mind, however that's approached and what's going on inside between our ears or wherever the mind resides. Spirituality, I think, is some sort of, pursuit, but I do personally understand that to be, it is internal, but it is also, I don't know, sort of community, externally oriented, on making sense of the world, making sense of other people, making sense of the mysteries of the universe and the powers of the universe. And at some intersection of those is creativity.
Right.
But I think that there is this, question that your show is interested in, that you are interested in, of where does that creativity emerge, right?
Yeah.
And so that, I think that, so I think that's part of it. I think that's part of why I wanted to ask that question, is because I'm not sure. I really like that is the motivation and spirit and why of your show. Is a kind of like, where does creativity come from? And the second part is, how do we define it? And I think that demystify piece has a little bit of the, there are misunderstandings about it. There's a misunderstanding about what it means to be creative, who has creativity, how we define it.
Yeah.
So I think I'm satisfied with that answer. But
Okay.
but I guess I also, let's talk about the demystification piece a little bit more. Is it your experience that there are fundamental misunderstandings around creativity?
Absolutely. There's the myth of the solitary artist, that we're working somehow in isolation, when the truth is, while we might be working solo in certain contexts as writers or whatever, but we're all interconnected in all these profound ways. Our ideas don't come from nowhere. We take inspiration from other people, from the world. Often in our creative work, we're collaborating.
Yeah.
There's also this myth of the sort of, mental illness and creativity, right?
Yeah.
And that creativity, inspiration strikes or it doesn't. Right? Either you are feeling the creative flow or you're not. And it's like, well, actually, discipline is a huge part of it. Sitting down on a regular basis to do your work. The muse is more likely to come if you set up the conditions for it to arrive.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you find that you fall prey to those mythologies too? Like, well, I as you're talking about it, I was thinking, and just to throw the question back on myself, like, I know what you mean, that there is this myth of tortured mind, tortured soul, and a kind of like struggling artist kind of, I don't know, mind's eye image of what that means. And in my own creative work, I know that to be bullshit, right?
Right.
But it's funny, but it still sort of can have hidden power. So I don't know. Do you find that you yourself can fall prey to those myths at times? Or are you really vigilant about how those mythologies and tropes or, I don't know, framings can show up for people?
Yeah. I think, and when I coach people in creativity and writing, there's no one way to do things.
Right.
And we all think differently. Some of us are more visual. Some of us are more auditory. So I don't tell people like, here's how you have to do it. I tell people, find the way that works for you and do that. Right. So for me personally, I think I am sort of blessed in a way to have a pretty good balance of left brain, right brain functioning, meaning I can get into a creative flow state and an ideation state, but I can also follow through and make a list and knock things out and get things done. Sometimes people ask me like, how do you do everything you do? And I'm kind of like, I'm not really sure, but somehow it happens, because I'm not super disciplined. I don't sit down at the same time every day.
Right.
And like right now, I'm working on 3 different musical projects with different collaborators. I'm writing an academic article. I'm writing a book. I'm doing this podcast. And I find the time. I take breaks. I went out to the drugstore the other day and I ran into someone I knew and they were like, aren't you working today? And I'm like, well, I'm always working, but I take breaks.
Yeah.
And that's just I'm not super structured or disciplined in terms of like having a really rigid time schedule, but I'm disciplined in that I get it done one way or another.
Well, and my impression of you is that you're disciplined about your mindfulness and about your spiritual practice. I don't know exactly what that looks like, if you meditate at a certain time every day.
Every morning.
I mean, well, so to me, the discipline, that's where the discipline originates.
Yeah.
It is inside.
It's a good foundation to start the day off.
Totally. Because then am I in a flow state? Am I not being productive? What do I need to do for me? Like, I think that, start within and build from there.
Yeah.
All right. I want to talk about the journey of this show.
Yes.
A little bit.
Let's get into it.
So in my experience, anybody who's ever come to me and said, I'm interested in a podcast or I'm interested in a show, there's always something of a creative chasm. There's what you have in your mind. There's the idea, the vision. This is how I think it's going to go. And then there's what actually happens. I think you've closed that chasm over the course of the year, and as long as we've been working together. But I don't know, has that been your experience? Was that chasm there? And like, talk to me a little bit about how you thought it was going to be and what actually happened.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you're right. Anytime we create anything, we first have to envision it. We talked about this in the episode on imagination with Diana Rivera. You first have to be able to visualize or imagine, and then you have to bring it into being.
Yeah.
Right? And it's almost in some way like a magical, mystical process. And it's not. It's very concrete and tangible. But, I had this idea. I've been talking to you about possibly doing a podcast for years, and I had different ideas for what it could look like or focus on. And then we started working together, and I think you're right. I almost see it as like we kind of started out in this place, we diverged, and now we've converged again.
Yeah.
In terms of how we've collaborated.
Yeah.
But I feel good about it, and I do feel like I've closed the gap. I mean, I feel like I'm having the conversations I want to have and exploring the topics I want to explore.
I think that's the question, I mean, I've really come around to this idea lately, when anybody becomes a creator, audio, video, whatever, there's this, we want to have audiences. We want to build an audience.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a reframe in my mind lately around, I think it's about community, which, the difference between a community and an audience may be semantic, right? Like, but I think that it's about relational wealth, and it's about connecting with people, and it's about, I'm curious about you, and I want to know more about you in the time we've allotted to talk about this, and microphones and cameras. So I guess, maybe this is leading a little bit much, but have there been benefits of this that you didn't expect? Is there anything about becoming a creator and a host that, is sort of like, we can talk about the challenges first if you'd rather, but I don't know. I'm kind of wanting to get at a little bit more of what was unexpected or surprising in the experience so far.
Yeah. Well, I think the podcast for me personally has brought together a lot of ways in which I've studied and trained over the years. And it's like kind of brought them together in a really beautiful way. My studies of psychology and creativity and spirituality, my experiences as a teacher and professor, as a musician and performer.
Yeah.
It's all kind of, coalesced in a different way than anything I've done before. But I don't know, just even when I had this kind of first spark of an idea, it just felt like it had some life to it.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, I that makes sense that it's calling forth different parts of your history and different parts of your mind, your brain, your training, your experience. And it's different for every conversation, because it kind of like, what to use here, what of your history is most relevant in any exploration or conversation or story. All right, I feel like you're chomping at the bit to want to talk about our tensions along the way. So I don't even know how to ask this question, but you and I, we had some really, I think in retrospect, I'd call them very healthy disagreements. And I don't even know if disagreements is the right word, but there was some tense moments over the last year, and there's some confounding factors in that. I don't know. How would you tell that story? How would you describe, our dialogue and how, what happened?
Yeah. Well, and I want to preface this by saying I think it's important that we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Because I love collaboration. I think it creates a synergy. It's in our name, Syncreate, synergy and co-creation.
Yeah.
All about collaboration. It is not always easy.
I agree.
There are creative tensions and conflicts. And I think there's that can be healthy and productive up to a point. And then, bands break up all the time because of that sort of thing or whatever it is, partnerships and things like that.
And it's sort of hard to know when you've crossed that line, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, is this generative or is there still enough of a shared vision or humility or whatever those qualities are that allow people to collaborate?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think...
Good preface. Yeah.
I had this idea, and I knew you to be a person who is very experienced with hosting and creating and producing podcasts. You have a really awesome show right now, Famous and Gravy.
Thank you.
And I wanted to
title may change by the time this comes out, but thank you.
We're all in transition, right? It's all a work in progress. But, I felt like you were a great person to help me bring this to life. As you've described, you're a bit of an audio purist.
Yeah.
And, the shows that you've developed and created in the past had a little bit more of that maybe academic and sort of public radio-ish, which is also kind of what a reference point I'm coming from. But I really wanted to do video.
Yeah.
It was really important to me to do video. And that was a source of tension between us.
It still is. I had to shower before this today.
What? A shower?
Yeah, exactly. I'm used to showing up in a hoodie and not shaving.
Right.
No, I mean, from my perspective, and I think I'm glad you pushed me into video creation to some extent. I still feel like where I can offer the most value is in an audio experience. And it's not that I'm not a fan of video. It's that I haven't been a student of it. Mm-hmm. That I didn't realize this. I couldn't have put this into these words until you and I really got into it. That I've studied audio. Like, I have really spent time paying attention to the aesthetics and the nuances and the subtleties, and when does a song fade up, and do you leave in a pause here, and how is a question asked, and like what makes it compelling. And I still largely view myself that way.
Yeah.
But and so it's not, it's not that there's no place for video in my world, but it's that it was something you really wanted to do, and I felt out of my depth.
Yeah.
And I think, you could say you encouraged me or pushed me or, but and I'm glad we did. I'm glad we did. One, it's practical.
Yeah.
That's the way the world's going. But it's forced me to think about, I guess historically I've really thought about the differences between audio and video, and what that's, as it relates to audience.
Yeah.
And now I'm in a different place with that. Now I'm actually really thinking about similarities between audio and video. And I think that's a good frame for me to be in.
Yeah.
I had a different sort of perspective on it. I mean, I think, you went to the audio video conversations we had.
That's not the only tension.
That's not the only tension point we had. I think another one, and this is actually, I don't think there was as much disagreement as just we didn't exactly know where to go. I think scope has been something that we struggled with, right? And it makes sense. You're talking to really remarkable, interesting people who have made oftentimes careers as creatives. And that, not to fall back on any kind of trope or mythology or anything, but I think that they've had life journeys that brought them to that point, right? And they've learned lessons and have wisdom, and there's like all this story there that we want to get into. For me, one of the big shifts in your show came somewhere around episode 10 or 11. I forget exactly where we kind of, began to think about things differently. But I started encouraging you to focus less on the biographical information of the guests and more on their creative process in some sense, whether it's starting with a particular piece of art and, how you experience it or how something came to be.
Yes.
And I'm going to continue to encourage you in that direction.
And that's been a great, once we kind of landed
was
on
this
that, super helpful.
Okay.
Super helpful. In the beginning, I was learning how to be a host and learning, how to ask the questions, and I was focusing more on the bio and the background and, tell me about your life. And you really pushed me to narrow that focus. And I think that was helpful. And, ironically, in the beginning, I was like preparing so much, and I still prepare, but then like I kind of throw that away and I just try to come in and be more spontaneous and really have the conversation, because I want it to not just be like an interview. I want it to be a dialogue.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think one of the things I've argued as we've looked at approach and how you approach conversations is that you will still get biographical information.
Yeah.
You will still learn about a person.
Totally.
As a sort of inevitable byproduct. I guess I'm wondering, you said, oh, totally. Is that true? Is that definitely bearing out? I mean, do you walk away from some of these conversations like, man, I could just sit with that person all day? I mean...
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, we recorded a couple sessions yesterday, and, I have one that'll be coming out in January with 3 guests. So the first time I've had more than one guest. And, we were all sitting in this room, and the hour went by and it was like, oh, is it over already? We just barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to talk about here. And, we talked about like, we need to do this again. We need to have a part 2. This could be a whole series unto itself.
Yeah. I think it's, I think it's always going to remain a hard question. And I think part of it is one of the things I really admire about you and about your show is the community you inhabit. I mean, you really are, in relationship with a very diverse and interesting set of people. And there is this sort of like desire to show them off to the world, right? And to your audience. And,
For sure.
And show how you built that and how others can belong in that. And I think creating that sense of belonging, I don't know, that seems like also part of this spirituality piece that you talk about at the beginning of any episode.
It's super important. And Charlotte, my business partner in Syncreate, we're working on a book, our second book, Creating in Community.
Yeah.
And it's all about that idea.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let me ask this question about the show. Is there more you want to talk about in terms of our creative tensions?
Well, I do want to come back for a moment to scope.
Okay.
Because we did have some conversations about that.
We did.
And,
we did.
I am trying to present like a range of what creativity can look like and what forms it can take. And, you were definitely encouraging me to focus more. And I think we've found a pretty good middle ground with that. But, there's always this argument like, well, you got to just find your niche and you just got to stay there and focus there. And, you see that in marketing, you see that in academia, you just got to hyper specialize in this one tiny little area of one little field. And, I see myself as a creative polymath. We talked about that concept in episode 3 with Michael Walker. And I think a lot of creative people tend not to focus only in one area. They tend to have interests and, in a range of areas. And those interests feed each other and inform each other. Like the classic example, Einstein apparently came up with a theory of relativity while playing piano.
Yeah.
And so
Huh.
I kind of push back, but people are telling me all the time, you got to focus, you got to specialize, you got to find your niche. And yet I was talking with someone last night, one of my musical collaborators who's, been a big supporter of the show. And he was like, I love that about your show because, there's so many shows where, you tune in, they're great podcasts, they're great shows, whatever. But like every time you tune in, you kind of know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And with your show, there's like, something different, something new. And so, I don't know, maybe I'll die on that sword, but
I'm actually not so sure that that's a disagreement we have. I don't think that I think that there's a difference between because for me, like, breadth exists in specificity, that by drilling down, and I think this is my background as an earth scientist.
Yeah.
This is going to be a super weird analogy, but I'll offer it up. I was a geologist by training, and one of the things about geology is that you're dealing with incredible timescales. And I remember interviewing a geologist once, and he was telling a story about how he was looking at this, bryozoan or something from the, I don't know, Paleozoic. I don't know. It was like 250 million years ago.
Yeah.
And he was looking at, it was like a shell. And he could see this little incrustation of some organism and another one right next to it. And he was like, these two little guys were competing against each other. And that competition probably played out over the course of a few days and a few hours. But that was 250 million years ago. And there was something about honing in on that really, really, really tiny, a few days ago, but 250, where for a minute I was like, oh my God, there's so much time in the world. There's so much shit. And that's kind of what I mean.
Right.
I think that like by honing in on, when did you hit that perfect note in this song? When did you come up with that right word and this bit of poetry? How did you find, this angle on a building as an architect that just made the whole thing somehow breathe. I mean, that idea, that philosophy is something that I think orbits your show. And that's part of what I want you to get into. But I also think that by going that narrow, you do expose the world, and you do expose, the breadth of creativity, the complexity of creativity, the multifaceted streams of creativity. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure we're talking about two different things. Maybe we are, but I don't know. This is the nature of it, right? I mean, this is, and I think that all of it, my number one obligation is always to the audience. Are they learning something about themselves? Are they learning something about their aspirations as creatives? How one gets there, and who can they relate to? Mm-hmm. And I think, again, you have incredible skills in terms of showing the diversity of not just people, but those experiences in the creative process. So I don't know. We'll keep talking about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if we could try and hash it out now, or we could save it for another conversation. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
How do you define success going forward? What is success for you in this show?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to engage people. I hope people will embrace their own creativity, whether they consider themselves to be artists or just people going about their daily lives, that they'll have a deeper and wider understanding of what creativity is. It's so funny. I was talking with my friend Daniel the other night, and we were like looking up like what's trending in creativity on Google. And the number one question is, what is creativity?
Yeah. Huh.
People want to know, like, what is creativity?
That question's out there.
I'm not sure on the show we've ever actually defined it.
Yeah.
But, scholars traditionally say that creativity, in order for something to be creative, it needs to be both novel and useful. It needs to be something that hasn't been done before and something that actually solves a tangible problem. Now, you could argue like a piece of art, like how is it useful? Maybe it's useful in, expanding possibilities, right? Or whatever. And I see creativity more broadly than that. That we're all using it all the time, that we use it to make meaning of our experiences, that we use it to kind of enrich our lives.
You're expanding the boundaries of what it means to be creative.
See?
It's exactly what I wanted to do with this conversation, is bring it full circle.
Yeah.
I think that's success. And what I didn't hear in that is I want to, have 1 million followers,
I mean, that wouldn't hurt.
Sure. But I think the mission and vision is the first thing. And I think you've embraced the idea of podcast creation as a learning journey and podcast creation as an act of creative self-love. And I'm really proud of you. I'm really proud of you. And I'm really glad we've gone on this journey so far together, and I'm excited to keep on it.
Same here. And I do feel like we've both, our friction, our creative friction, I think it has helped both of us to grow.
Yeah, goddamn right.
Yeah, so I'm pleased that we've gotten to this place, because there were some tears.
Yeah, there were tears.
There were some arguments.
I cried.
I cried.
I might have turned my camera off, but I cried. Yeah, no, but I mean, that's, as you said, I think there's been enough shared vision along the way to get through that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you. I think another thing I want to add is that, I sometimes felt like you had this level of expectation or perfectionism, perhaps, that
How dare you? How dare you?
I know, right? There's nothing wrong with wanting it to be great, but I felt sometimes you were a bit critical or whatever. I wanted to hear more of the positive feedback as well as the constructive feedback or whatever, but I think you really did push me. A lot of people start a podcast in their closet, and I've heard people say, well, the production values don't really matter as long as your content is good. Well, I think it needs to be both, at least in my opinion.
I'm a snob, I guess,
right?
And a perfectionist.
But I think you have really pushed me to a place that I'm really happy with.
Cool.
So I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me on the journey.
Absolutely. Thank you. So for our creativity pro tip today, we've talked a lot about both discipline and collaboration. So this one, you get a 2-for-1. So number 1, what is your daily discipline? Whenever I work with clients, I encourage them to develop a regular practice. Maybe daily is not realistic, but sitting down and doing your work on a consistent basis. Again, it allows the muse a place to land, right? So that's the first piece. And the second piece is to really think about, how are you collaborating in your creative work, whatever that looks like? It could be in your family, it could be in your professional life, it could be sports, whatever it is. But what is the quality of collaboration? And actually, I was just talking again with someone last night who teaches a course that includes collaboration. And basically, he was saying that collaboration is a combination of absolute transparency in communication, asking for what you need, and sharing resources. So I think that's a great one. Thanks to Randy Langford for that one. At Syncreate, we're here to support your creative endeavors. So if you have an idea for a project or a new venture and you'd like our help, please reach out to us for one-on-one coaching or join our Syncreate 6-month coaching group starting in April of 2024. We'll be guiding you through the creative process from start to finish using our Syncreate model of play, plan, and produce, as we describe in our book. And then one final plug, we are now on Patreon. So love your support in continuing to grow and develop the show. So we're recording today at Record ATX Studios in Austin, Texas. Thanks to the team here for all your support. And of course to Mike Osborne, our guest for today, and my audio producer, for all of your help and guidance and vision in bringing this show to life.